for joining us today for the International Relations Council's International Career Series. My name is Natalie Friend, and I am the Global Education Intern for the International Relations Council. For those unfamiliar, the IRC is a nonpartisan organization. We are apolitical that provides a platform for greater understanding of international topics and how they affect and interact with the Kansas City community. With the permission of our participants today, we will be recording this event and broadcasting it live on Facebook. If you do not want to be featured in the recording, please feel free to mute your audio and turn off your camera now. As a courtesy to our speaker, we ask that all audience members mute their microphones for the duration of the program unless there is an interactive portion. Today, we are very pleased to welcome Jessica Vandervoort de Montiel. Jessica is the United States Peace Corps recruiter for Western Missouri, Kansas, and Nebraska. A graduate of Truman State University, Jessica worked in employee benefit sales in Kansas City prior to serving in the Peace Corps. As a Peace Corps volunteer in Guatemala, Jessica partnered with local education and health ministries to develop rural youth development programs, empowering youth to lead healthy lives and to commit to positive roles in their communities. Following her volunteer service, she remained in Guatemala as a Peace Corps staff member and continued to support volunteers and Guatemalan partners as the youth program and training specialist. A strong believer that every American should be given the opportunity to serve, she returned to Kansas City as a program officer for the Corporation for National and Community Service, overseeing federal Senior Corps and AmeriCorps grant programs in Kansas and Missouri. Returning to the agency in 2018 as a recruiter, she is thrilled to support the agency from home. It is safe to say that Jessica and the other returned Peace Corps volunteers with us today have fully engaged in the international experience, and we thank you so much for giving us some of your time. For this event, please feel free to pose your questions through the chat feature throughout the program, and we will do our best to get to as many of them as possible during the Q&A period at the end. In the sidebar, there will also be a link to the IRC website if you're interested in joining us as a member or receiving our newsletter. Thank you, and please welcome Jessica.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for the introduction. Thank you to the IRC for giving us the opportunity to talk about Peace Corps service. I will be talking a little bit about what Peace Corps is. We have 3 returned Peace Corps volunteers who will be sharing a bit of their story, and we'll also have a little bit of Q&A and be able to answer the questions that you have at the end of today's session. So, Natalie, can you give me a thumbs up if you're able to see my screen okay? Awesome, thank you. Wonderful. As Natalie mentioned, I am the recruiter for this area. I am one of over 230,000 returned Peace Corps volunteers. I served in Guatemala in the Youth Development Program. When I left for Peace Corps service, my Spanish was very average, but thanks to the opportunities that Peace Corps gave me, I am now fluent in Spanish. A lot of Peace Corps volunteers that serve in Guatemala also learn indigenous languages, over 20 indigenous languages in that country. My community was primarily Spanish speaking, so I did not have the opportunity. I am a graduate of Truman State University, as she mentioned, and Kansas City is my home. So I'm really happy to be here to chat with you all. As a volunteer in the Youth and Development Program, my job was to work with young people, typically middle school age, both in and out of school, on life skills, preparing for the world of work, preventing HIV, AIDS. And so I just have 2 pictures up here. We meet with one of my students who was a wonderful leader, and she actually now has a position as the current director of youth programming in my community that I served in. And then the other picture, I'm facilitating a workshop with teachers on how to use a condom, using condoms and bananas. And so at Peace Corps, we have a pretty limited resources in the communities that we're working with, and we use resources that can be easily accessible so that these professors would then be able to transfer that information onto their students and other community members. So that's just a little bit of my story as a Peace Corps volunteer. Peace Corps, as many of you know, has been around since 1961, and the mission since then has not changed, of the goal of promoting world peace and friendship. And we do that by fulfilling 3 goals. The first is to meet the need of interested countries in having men and women bring their technical skills. I emphasize interested countries, because we do not go anywhere where we are not invited. Host countries will let us know, will invite us and tell us what their needs are as far as technical assistance that they're requesting. We in turn then do an assessment and work together with those host countries on determining what the best program is for Peace Corps in that country. The second and third goals are really about cultural exchange. The second goal is promoting a better understanding of Americans on part of the people served. For many of the folks that we interact with when we're overseas for our 2 years of service, we may be the only American that they meet. We know that there is a variety of experiences that Americans bring, and it's a big goal for us to take to represent the diversity of America when we are overseas. The third goal is help promote a better understanding of the peoples on the part of Americans, which means that during service and after service, we carry this goal on to be able to be folks that support and will talk about our countries, share our experiences where we served. I will forever be a promoter of Guatemalan culture, talking about the beautiful, the clothes that we wear, where each community is represented by different designs and colors. I will always be talking about the delicious caldos, or brothy soups, that were shared so many times around tables with community members and family members. And so that is something that doesn't end with service. We take that on with us for the rest of our lives. Peace Corps service is 2 years. It is 2 years plus 3 months of training. The minimum requirements for being a Peace Corps volunteer are being a United States citizen and at least 18 years old. The current number of volunteers is the most recent number of volunteers that we had recently overseas. I would say that 95% of our volunteers have at least an undergraduate degree. So if that helps you gauge what we're looking for to be the most competitive candidate, know that 95% do have an undergraduate degree. We talk about married couples in this slide, that it has changed recently. Couples do not have to be married, but they do have to be in a committed relationship to be able to serve together. And that is part of being able to address the challenges that do come with Peace Corps service. We want to make sure that folks are in that committed relationship. It is a primarily female-leaning agency, with over 62% of our volunteers are female. And the age range is wide, from 20 to 86. While we do have a minimum age limit to join the Peace Corps, there is no upper age limit. And so we have volunteers coming to us from different stages in life, whether it's right out of college or as you are making a mid-career change or into retirement. All right, so this map shows, with a couple of exceptions, where we are currently accepting applications and conducting interviews. So we serve in over 60 countries around the world. There are a couple of exceptions here. We unfortunately do no longer have a post in China. However, there are some other countries that we are actively reopening or opening for the first time: Kenya, Sri Lanka, Montenegro. As far as our program areas where volunteers serve in, you will serve as a Peace Corps volunteer in one of these 6 areas. I talked about youth and development. Our other sectors: agriculture, education, environment, health, community, economic development. So, for example, as an education volunteer, you may be assigned to a village where, for example, 20 hours a week, you are working in a school teaching English in an already established program, but you're complementing the work that's being done there. And then a few more hours of the week, you may be facilitating education, English education programs outside of your school, maybe with a community group. We also call volunteers to look at their interests and talents and assess the needs of their community, take in, what it is the community is asking outside of the primary area of concentration. And volunteers are able to implement secondary projects. I'm looking forward to hearing from the other returned Peace Corps volunteers to hear a little bit more about what their secondary projects were. Before we hear from those three, I do want to say a couple of things about COVID-19. Peace Corps made the difficult decision and first time in over 59 years where we had an evacuation of all volunteers and to temporarily suspend operations overseas. That was for the health and well-being of our volunteers. Peace Corps will resume placing volunteers in the field as soon as it is safe to do so for them and our partners and our host countries around the world. We are looking forward to the future. We're actively monitoring the situation to be able to hit the ground running. So that means we are accepting applications and we are conducting interviews and we are regularly updating our website about where we are in that process through this coronavirus crisis. So with that being said, I want to invite Mia Richardson, who served in North Macedonia, to share with us a little bit about her Peace Corps experience. Okay, Mia may be having some technical difficulties, so I'm going to, oh, you're not muted. Okay, Mia, we're gonna go ahead and advance to Sean's presentation, give you a few minutes to troubleshoot that, and we'll be right back with you, okay? So Sean, you are on. Let me go ahead and move on to your presentation. 1 second. All right, Sean, do we have you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you all for having me. My name is Sean Grossnickel. I was born and raised in Kansas City. Ended up getting a degree in international business at Belmont University down in Nashville, Tennessee. And then I went straight from college to the Peace Corps. And one of the reasons I chose to do the Peace Corps was I wanted to use what I had learned in college to make a difference. And for me, international business, I'm sure you guys know that finding a career in international business right when you get out of college is not the easiest thing. And so when I was looking, Peace Corps just seemed like a great start, a great way to just test if I really did like the international field, and got me out there. So this view right there is actually my village, which I will talk to more later. Next slide. So my host country, I was in Eastern Europe, Moldova, not Moldova. Everyone thinks it's with an A or with a U, and I don't exactly know why, right between Romania and Ukraine. It was a former USSR country, and that legacy still carries into a lot of its current political situation, its current economic situation. It essentially produced wine for the entire Soviet Union. It's one of the most fertile lands in Europe. If you've never had Moldovan wine, I do know the U.S. imports it, and I would highly recommend trying it. It is the poorest country in Europe, and it is the least visited country in Europe. Part of that is due 50% of the population has left since the fall of the USSR. Due to economic, not so much political, but mostly economic situation. There's no jobs and no one can make a living. So everyone goes over to Romania, France, Italy, and Spain to use their skills to make a living for their families. And then they come back like a month or two during the year. That little arrow is where I was, my village. Next slide. So my village was Koban. Everyone thought it was Chobani, and I was like, nope, that's not how that is pronounced. It is a village of 1,500 people in northwest Moldova. Moldova, as you can imagine, is still mostly agricultural. So a lot of daily life revolved around the harvest. When spring came, everyone was busy in their gardens, and everyone was, it's a big communal country that everyone goes and helps their neighbor with about everything. Primarily Eastern Orthodox, that was our town church, the only church in the village. And that, you can barely see it, that's a whole pile of corn that my neighbor was husking one day. And there's the school. The school had about 180 students, and I did have an English club or two there. Next slide. So I was community economic development, which really fit well with my major. That's really the only thing in the Peace Corps I felt qualified to do and actually was really passionate about doing. As I said, it is former USSR, which back in the day would be classified as a quote unquote second world country. Now we would just call it a developing country. But one of the reasons it was called a second world country is a lot of the structures from the USSR are still in place. Like the education system is strongly in place, and almost everyone has a public education, a decent public education. Of course, it, you know, compared to our standard, it's not the greatest, but it's there and it exists. Everyone values it. It's funded by the government, and it is a really big deal. And a legacy of more or less bureaucracy, but also just organizations and institutions that are still really developed. So for me, what I did was I did a lot of strategic planning. I worked directly with a community center in my village that did all the community center things. We fed the elderly, we had after school clubs, and like a lot of nonprofits or community centers, even in the States, some people have big hearts, but they don't have that management experience. They don't have that training on how to implement best practices, or in my case, the community center didn't really know how to prioritize its resources and really just be able to effectively do what it wanted to do. And so that was my main goal, even though, you know, I helped on a day-to-day basis with getting food to the elderly and helping run the clubs when no one was there. Did a lot of team building for the people who ran the organization, and yeah, so if that makes sense. Next slide. Moldova has, and I'm sure Mia can kind of attest to this when she has her thing. Eastern Europe kind of has similar interweaving cultures between the countries. A lot of the traditions, you know, kind of flow into one another. Moldova was a part of Romania for a time. It was a part of the USSR. And so its culture is kind of a mix of all that. That group of children right there and all the fun to the right, the top right, was a performance we got when we first arrived. And the song they sang essentially said, Moldovans sing when they're happy, Moldovans sing when they're sad, Moldovans dance when they're happy, Moldovans dance when they're sad. And just, you know, it's that kind of culture, like a very community-oriented culture that kind of takes life as it is. You know, they're not a very idealistic culture, which I don't think is a bad thing. It's just one of, this is life, we're going to make the most of it, you know, and why be sad when you can be happy. Very beautiful thing. Dancing was a huge thing. They had what was called the hora, which if you look to the left, it's a circle dance. They're doing it at Christmas right there. And every wedding, every party, everyone's dancing the hora, and so fun. Bottom left was me helping my host family pick grapes for the grape harvest, which we turned into house wine. Everyone pretty much has their own house wine, which is great. Highly recommend making your own wine. And then food, of course, yeah, I would say that's a thing for a lot of cultures, but just like all the food, all the time, everywhere, which is great. Not good for the waistline, but great for comfort when you need it. And so, yeah, it's just a brief overview of my experience. Next slide. my biggest takeaways, it really can. It's like a great way to test the waters. It gets you to know whether you want to live abroad, whether that's something you want to do, really puts you out there, you know, and like, yes, you have a wonderful support system in the Peace Corps, but it's still hard, you know, and there's a lot of hard times, and it just kind of shows you to yourself whether you can do it, and shows it to yourself whether you can want it. Obviously teaches you intercultural competencies, always good to just build those in. One of the reasons I chose to do it too is it's widely recognized, not just in the United States, but globally. And it's not a gap year. Like some people are like, oh, it's just like a gap year. No, it's real professional experience, real resume experience, that will get you far and can really be a jumpstart, not just for government jobs like a lot of people go into, but even in the private sector. And like all international careers, you're going to have some people who just get it and value it and be like, that's so cool. And then other people who are like, what'd you do? Like, what was that? I don't understand. Um, and you know, I mean, it just depends. So yeah, I loved my Peace Corps experience. I was there a total of 11 months before I got evacuated in March. My secondary projects included, I taught an entrepreneurship club, taught a bunch of English classes, and then I was getting ready to do a grant to get books for the library, and the school. So, yeah.
Sean, thank you so much. We're so happy to have you as part of our Return Peace Corps volunteer family. Loved hearing about that. Let's take a check-in with Mia and see if we're able to have her on and hear her.
Hey, is this better?
That's perfect. All right, I'm going to go back to your slides, and then we'll have you take it from here, okay?
Thanks. Sorry about that.
All right. Take it away, Mia.
Okay. So I served in Macedonia. I was there for about 18 or 19 months before I was evacuated. So I was coming up on really my last summer of service. And when I got there, it actually was not called North Macedonia. So in my time, I got to see the country go through a lot of changes, and it was a really interesting time to be there. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. So a little bit about Macedonia. I included kind of a second image. You have it on the map here. The green star is where my site was located. So really close to Kosovo, pretty close to Macedonia as well. And then down below, you can kind of see a size comparison of North Macedonia to the Kansas City area. And that's because one of the biggest questions I always got was, Macedonia, what's that? That must be tiny, right? And it really honestly is. It takes about 5 hours to drive across the whole country, and you can kind of see that from the size comparison. So North Macedonia is a small, really multi-ethnic state. I actually lived, if you want to go to the slide about my community, I actually lived in an Albanian community. So my village was called Jerovian, and it was a really small village. The official record says there are about 900 people living there, but one of the challenges in Macedonia is that there hasn't been a census since the early 2000s. And we think the population has been decreasing then. So realistically, I wouldn't be surprised if it was closer to maybe people in my village. So that's kind of a challenge for the country. It is all Albanian village, but Albanians are actually one of the largest ethnic minorities in the state. So I had a kind of unique experience because not only my village, but my nearest major city of Tetovo is also majority Albanian. So I kind of lived in a political center for one of the larger minorities in the state. So my work, I worked at the primary school, which was really the only school in a village that small. We had about 80 students, and I worked as an English teacher, but my focus is not only on teaching classes, but also on training my counterpart. So a lot of what I did was kind of introducing new teaching methods encouraging them to consider play as a form of learning, convincing them that we could use playing cards to learn English. We could use, dice with words on them, and it wasn't going to be a huge problem. And that was a lot of fun. I also have a picture here of some of the things I did sort of on my own. At the bottom left, you can see my students lined up, and along the wall, we have everything we created in an Innovate Your Dreams project. So we took the time to think about STEM and also included art in that. And we thought about jobs of the future. So just kind of a way for them to get outside of a very textbook-centered curriculum in the Macedonian education system. And then in the bottom right, you can see the favorite game I came up with for my students is letter cubes. And so we would spell our vocabulary words out. And students from my second graders all the way to my ninth graders really enjoyed that chance to be tactile with their learning and to not just sit still. And then the last picture here, kind of in the middle, is of my secondary work. I worked as the clubs coordinator for Girls Leading Our World, GLOW, which basically coordinated for clubs for youth development in communities throughout the entire country. We were under the YMCA umbrella, and this gave me a chance to help youth across the country develop leadership skills, find kind of their own sense of empowerment, and then also I supported the mentors for those clubs in getting their clubbers active. This is a picture of my local club in Tetovo. We did a karaoke meeting to kick off a semester one year. So that was a ton of fun. And it culminated in a summer, the GLOW camp, which with the community that I was working in, when students were able to go, it's a life-changing opportunity. A lot of culture can be conservative. It's predominantly Muslim. And so for a lot of girls, the idea of spending a week outside of their home with their peers was crazy, but amazing once they were able to do it. So we can move on to culture. The biggest thing that I can say about Albanian culture, which I had a lot more experience with than I think Macedonian culture, is a word that I don't really know how well it translates. Musafir, which I guess you would translate as guest, but it's a whole phenomenon in this culture. It goes so beyond what we would think of as guest. So the first picture on the top left is an example of this. And basically how I would describe it is it's a very like at home communal culture. And so what you do in the evenings is you go and you visit and you sit and you chat, and sometimes you watch your soaps together. Sometimes they're just blaring in the background. You drink your coffee, you drink more coffee, you drink tea, you eat your snacks. And it's a very like inviting and relaxing scenario. And it goes on. Like the visits can be 4 or 5 hours easily. And a lot of families will do this very, very frequently. So this is a picture of me with some of my original training community. Not quite family members, but basically family members. They were very close to my host family at the time. Down in the bottom left, you can see the Turkish coffee. So there was Turkish coffee, and in the top left, you can see the chai rusi, and those are like the cultural drinks. And that's because so much of like going out, especially for women, is going to people's houses, and this is what you do when you're visiting. You have to have some. So if you don't like caffeine, you're in for a hard time while visiting people. The top right picture is an example from my school's semi-matura, which is like the prom for our 9th grade students at the end of the year. And this is me and some of my fellow colleagues dancing the aura with our students. And the aura is like a circle dance that happens at basically any big get-together like this, but especially at weddings. And you do it just like this, like straight face the whole time. and moving all together. And I never quite got good at it, but I could hold my own. And this is one of the pieces of culture that I think actually really connects Albanian and Macedonian culture. And Roma, the Romani people are also a big ethnic group in Macedonia, a little bit smaller than Albanians, but across all three cultures, the aura, even if it has a slightly different name and slightly different, flourishes to it, it's something that everyone does at weddings. The final picture at the bottom right kind of gives you a little bit of an example of what production weddings are. They are honestly like a week or 2 week long event with multiple big nights. So this is an example. This is not the bride. This is the bride's sister that I am with, and her ball gown, her hair. This was one of about 3 ball gowns that she wore that night. And I never reached that level of integration where I had the multiple dresses at the weddings, but eventually I realized that my normal little dress was not going to cut it, and I went out and got something a little bit nicer. So it's a very big deal in Albanian culture to put on the real production, to really see everyone and to celebrate really heartily. This also is not actually the wedding. This was what they call the henna night, which is kind of the equivalent of a bachelorette party, although very different in cultural context. Yeah, so that kind of gives you an idea. The last thing I want to say about culture is that even though I was in a really small village, and because it was a Muslim village, it was often very conservative and a little bit like restricting for the women. This is why all the visiting happens in households, because there aren't a lot of public spaces where you could go. One thing that was really interesting about my village is that there was an ice cream parlor called Saranda, and it was one of the only places in my entire municipality where in the summertime it was not taboo to see a woman there getting ice cream. Now, they were also open in the winter, but I guess like we didn't need ice cream as much in the winter, because in the winter you shouldn't really go. But in the summertime, there was like a little bit of that space. So I think that's something really interesting. Even though my village was so small, it kind of had that uniqueness to it. So that's all I have to share, but I'm happy to answer any further questions.
Thank you so much, Mia. We'll have a chance for questions at the very end. Love hearing about the diverse experiences between Peace Corps volunteers, sites, countries, and individual experiences in general. So we're going to go ahead with Austin. Austin, give me a second and I'm going to queue up your slides, all right? Whoop, I think I went past them. All right, here we are. Austin, if you're, oh, there you are.
There we go. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Austin. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Namibia in the education sector. I taught English and IT. It's great to meet everybody. How many people do we have in this chat room? Jessica, can you fill me in on that?
I think about 15. Natalie, if that sounds about right? Yeah, see it. I see some head shaking. Yeah.
Wonderful. I'm not super familiar with Zoom, so I'll try my best. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm glad to come and talk about Peace Corps. It's definitely a whole wave of life-changing experiences all rolled up into one. I was a volunteer in Namibia, which is right on the border of South Africa and Angola. And I served in the education sector. So let's go ahead and get started. Oops, can't quite, okay, thanks. Okay, so So yeah, so this is the area where I served in. I'm also a former campus ambassador, so shout out to anybody that's in the campus ambassador program. But after doing that, I joined Peace Corps and served in Group 50. And we were about to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Namibia's independence, so, which is highlighted right here in the bullet point. So Namibia is in the sort of on the southern tip of Africa, on the southern region, right on top of South Africa and also right beside Botswana. It was the last country to gain independence. It was originally occupied by the Germans, but over different conflicts and wars, South Africa took over, and then eventually Namibia gained independence in 1990, which is pretty unique considering that it's relatively kind of a new country per se, but it has made, headlines globally, being in one of the top 10 countries to advance gender equity and also combating HIV/AIDS with PEPFAR, the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief. It's an average of 10 kilometers per person, which is pretty unique. There's only 2.5 million people in the population of Namibia, but it has so much land. So you'll have some pretty long drives where you won't see too many people, which kind of, in a sense, forces you to make the most of the interactions that you do have with people. And it's well known for the Herero genocide that happened in 1904 to 06. The Germans authorized the execution of a tribe, which actually eliminated almost 8%. But yet nowadays, the Herero are still going very strong, and they take a lot of pride and happiness and passion in their culture and showcasing it. We'll get to that. The main two languages are Afrikaans and English. Afrikaans is a Dutch language. It's very similar to Dutch, but English is actually the official language. There's a mixture of that. And again, it established Peace Corps as soon as it got independence. I think the gap was maybe 6 months. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so Namibia is huge, like I've said before, and it's really unique, kind of like seeing the regional differences in culture. Sort of towards the north, you're going to see more, a little bit more tribal practices, a lot more traditional beliefs, and sort of elements of culture that has kind of stood the test of time. Once you get to the central part in the south, you have a lot of influence from South Africa, which means a lot of South African house music, a lot of different kinds of attire for clothing, and then also sometimes the behavior of different populations can differ from the north to the south. So ironically, I served in the central region, which was in the town of Okahanja, about 45 minutes outside the capital, Windhoek. And it's primarily a dry territory, which is ironic because it's home to Namwater and Von Bach Dam, which are two primary landmarks, as well as being a place where water is sourced and spread across the country, as well as having different professional trainings for primary students, high school students, and other community members, which is really, really unique. The tribal influence is relatively mixed, so I was very lucky that I was able to be in a place where there wasn't really per se a dominant language. It was all kind of mixed in a melting pot. You have the different tribes, one being Nama, you have Herero, you have Damara, and Oshavombo occupies about 89% of the population. That's the most popular tribe. But still, you'll still see a lot of Afrikaans and English spoken amongst the territories. But ironically, Okahanja is a very small town, but it's home to a lot of athletic events that populations from around the country as well as schools will come to compete in athletics. And it's also the home for the Herero tribe that I was talking about, that has kind of reclaimed parts of their culture and showcased it in a way, it's kind of a stance after the genocide that happened to preserve their culture and keep it from disappearing. You can go to the next slide. I don't know how to, thank you. Okay, so this was just a little logo I designed, like a little picture I designed about Peace Corps Namibia for the anniversary. And on the left is just a picture of me and my counterpart, Mr. Reginald, who teaches life skills. I saw a question there, but I'll get to that, I guess, after I get to the slide here. Okay, so one of the initial talking points was, what does my work involve? So as a teacher, you know, obviously a lot of us that served in Peace Corps know that it goes outside the classroom. Really, the core element of Peace Corps work in Namibia is building capacity. So we have this phrase called PACA, which means participatory analysis, community action. So it's kind of the phase of how we're supposed to provide service, whether in education, youth development, or HIV/AIDS. So we're supposed to develop relationships, discover problems, solutions, and different ways of navigating the process, dream big ideas and acts of service for our communities, design collaboratively, not by ourselves, we're not saviors. We're there to sort of just be a resource and let the experts within their own community guide us in putting that into practice. And then at the end, of course, VRF, volunteer reporting form, different ways of measuring data and implementing different modes of development and educational practices in schools, deliver results. Last slide, I think. Okay, so we'll go on to culture. I mean, I'm kind of saying a lot right now, so I'll try to slow down. Culture. So we talked about the different tribes and how there's different histories, parts of history, tribalism, tribal conflict, and also tribal, how should I say, maybe, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a tolerance between a lot of most Namibians. There we go. So on the top left, that is the male traditional attire for the Hereros. They take pride in being one of the only tribes that fought back against the Germans, despite being outnumbered and also being at a disadvantage as far as guns and weaponry. On the bottom left, that is the female attire. I actually have a little doll here that highlights that Victorian style dress. Not sure if you can see, but on the top, there's a certain type of hat that's made with fabric, as well as the dress. And this is basically like a landmark piece of Herero culture. Herero women will wear this despite it being up to maybe 99 hundreds of degrees. And in Namibia, I'm telling you, you don't sweat, you just burn. It's dry and hot. But despite that, Herero women usually, when they get a little bit older, will showcase this dress, this sort of Victorian style dress that the Hereros wear as a part of their cultural heritage. And it takes a lot of sacrifice to make them and to wear them despite the heat. Now, okay, so on the bottom center, that is the Oshavombo tribe. Ironically enough, like I was saying about Namibians sort of coexisting with one another, this fabric is actually the Oshavombo attire. It's the fabric, but a Herero woman is wearing it in the Herero style dress. So that's an example of something you'll see in Namibia that's very, very unique, that the tribes will sort of mingle with each other and sort of influence each other with dress and also eating and different types of cultural celebrations and practices. And on the far right, on the top, that's actually me and one of the teachers who taught Damra and Nama. So the attire that she's wearing is usually what Namas will wear during a wedding or a celebratory event. There's a lot of celebration that goes into that. It's about a week of celebration for marriage and also different types of events. And then on the bottom right, I included a picture of cattle because cattle are a really big part of Namibian culture. They showcase wealth, they showcase different types of showcasing a family's worth, a family's respect of heritage, and also respect of nature. And different tribes and different people will have different reasons for having a lot of cattle. But anywhere you go, you're going to see people eating a lot of meat and beef and different, and also the more cattle someone has, generally sometimes that has a really big place in defining their place in worth in their community, as well as maybe just in the general region. I think that's the last slide I have. We'll have time for questions at the end, but I appreciate it. And then I'll end on what advice do I have for people applying? Just be ready to completely set your audible, your ears on a taking with a grain of salt. You're going to hear a lot of stuff and experience a lot of other things, and just be ready to make adjustments as you go.
Thank you, Austin. We're going to go ahead, Natalie, I'm going to skip ahead to some of the informational things, and then I'll come back to the panel questions so that we can take that conversation after some of the stuff I wanted to make sure that I did share with folks. Peace Corps is a federal agency. When you serve as a Peace Corps volunteer, we pay for your transportation to and from country. We provide a living stipend, and that usually covers housing. We provide your medical and dental coverage. It's not like insurance. You actually have providers in country that provide that for you, which is huge considering the cost of medical and dental care in the United States. Your student loans while you're serving can be deferred during service, which means you don't have to make payments on them. You accrue vacation 2 days a month, and so that over 2 years of service, that's 48 days of vacation to be able to explore your country or neighboring countries, or come home and visit family. Of course, that'll be on your own dime, but it is a wonderful opportunity to explore the world. And of course, career skills and training, which hopefully we'll have a second to talk about shortly. As far as after serving as a Peace Corps volunteer, you get $8,000 kind of as a readjustment. You can spend it on whatever you want after service, whether that's life back in the States or taking a big trip after service, etc. Graduate school benefits, that is huge. We have a program called Coverdell Fellows. It is we have over 100 universities participating. The minimum benefit is 25% up to 100% of tuition assistance for return Peace Corps volunteers. This is universities saying we value the experience of Peace Corps volunteers. We want them to be part of our programs. So it's something really important to look into. Federal employment advantages. After Peace Corps service for 12 months, you have what's called non-competitive eligibility. Joining the federal service can be difficult, and this helps give you a leg up to be able to apply and move to the front of the line on some, especially entry-level positions within the federal government, although some folks have been brought on at other levels. And I am going, here's a little bit more about graduate school, but I think I touched that. Application timing. As I said, we're still taking applications. We're still conducting interviews. We know we will need to hit the ground running when we're able to do so. We have a deadline coming up on July 1st, and those are positions going overseas in January, February, March of next year. Folks who work with recruiters are 55% more likely to go overseas. So my job is to work with you, help answer your questions, and help you learn how to be the most competitive applicant you can be when it comes to applying to Peace Corps. I set up a link in the chat that you can sign into to be able to get in touch with me, and we can go over your resume, talk about the opportunities that are available, and see what could be a good fit and find out if Peace Corps is right for you. I'm going to go back to the questions that we have for our panel. I am not going to ask all of these questions because I think we have some in the chat that might be good to talk about, and we've already addressed some of these. But the last two here, what skills did Peace Corps help you gain that would be beneficial for someone interested in working internationally? So if Mia, Austin, or Sean would like to share about that, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that.
I'd be happy to share.
Thank you.
For me, the biggest skill that I gained was an improved self-awareness. There are a lot of challenges that you'll face in your Peace Corps service, and as long as you're being introspective, you can learn a lot about what your strengths are, strategy dealing with areas that you might not be as strong on, and how to put those into action even under a situation that's sometimes stressful. So for me, I'm an introvert, but I want to be able to connect with people. So I was able to develop a lot of strategies for how to stay charged up and not feel drained and to still be able to make connections.
I guess I can chime in as well. It is, I mean, literally all the skills in the sense of you are working internationally and living internationally. So besides all the personal things, you learn how to work with people from a different culture, like just very basic ways to learn about another culture, very basic ways on how to learn how things operate in a completely new environment. And so, I mean, you are working internationally, so it is the job.
I would add that also it's a really good introduction into working with bureaucracy, whether in the domestic or international level, because with that, if you're working for government, you're going to have to learn to be told something and have to do a whole nother thing. You're going to have to deal with authority. You're going to have to kind of keep your mouth shut sometimes when you don't want to, and also do things that you're told rather than doing what you want. That's sometimes how it works. And really, Peace Corps prepared. I work in security right now, and I'm telling you, Peace Corps really, I never thought Peace Corps would prepare me for working in security, but it really, there's a lot of overlap. Reporting, adhering to policies, and working with people.
All right, thank you. And then what advice do you have for those who are thinking about applying to Peace Corps now or in the future?
My biggest advice would be to volunteer in your home community right now. I did a lot, like 6 to 8 hours a week for about 8 months while I was working on my application. And I was tired at times, but every single piece of volunteering that I was doing gave me a skill or like a little bit of knowledge that I brought to my Peace Corps service. So find something that interests you, start working on it. It's only going to improve your application, and it's going to give you skills to use in your service.
Awesome, thank you, Mia. Sean, did you have something you wanted to mention about that?
My advice would be, I mean, as with all Peace Corps, just keep an open mind. But I mean, it's one of those things, like, you can hear about stories all day. There's 60 different countries. Like, every experience is unique. Every experience is going to be different. As much as you can read about it, and much as you can try to learn all about even where you're going, just one of the biggest things is just being prepared for whatever comes. And try not to get like a set mold in your mind of, like either the worst being like, I'm going to go save the world, but even like a mold in your mind of this is how it's going to be. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Natalie to facilitate any questions that we might have from the participants today.
Thank you guys so much for speaking. I mean, it has been fascinating. We have a few questions that are kind of queued up in the chat already, so I'll go ahead and pull a few from there. And we welcome all the other audience members to send in your questions via the chat. If you'd like to do so privately, you can send it to me directly. So one of the questions someone had was about how the people you met in your service reacted to Americans. So as a representative of the United States in a country, meeting with people and young people and people across generations, what was that like for you? Did you feel like you were shouldering the weight of the country? Or did you feel well received? How did you navigate that?
I had like I said, mine was split. Like, it was still very much divided, like the pro-Russian side and the pro-European side. And so the pro-European side like they were like, Americans, like, you're heroes, like we love you, like you're great. And then you had the Russian side who were like, you're enemies, like, you know, you're a spy, like we don't believe you're actually here for service, like why are you here coming into our communities? You know, and it really just depends. I hate to say it, but like state media and just like what kind of media they see influences their opinions of you. Because if you watch a lot of either like Russian shows or even Chinese shows, Americans are portrayed as the enemies. Similar, like in America, Russians are usually portrayed as the enemies. And so it just kind of builds up this image. And conversely, other people think you're really cool.
Another question we had was about the graduate school program and like the funding after service. And I know, Jessica, you mentioned that briefly, but you know, if you maybe want to elaborate on that a bit more, or even if any of our RPCVs here have taken advantage of those programs and you have a personal experience with that, I think our audience would love to hear it.
If the other RPCVs don't have anything to add to that, I do just want to, I brought up the slide that has a little bit more of the details, over 200 programs at over 100 universities. That is something that doesn't have an expiration. You can access that anytime you finish your volunteer service. And we're seeing a surge of interest in being Coverdell fellow sponsors and really reaching out to the return Peace Corps volunteers, especially those who've recently been evacuated, to bring them into their schools and bring them into their programs. It's been an amazing thing to observe from afar how interested organizations are in bringing RPCVs in. I hope that helps answer the question.
So another question we have is about security. Did you guys have any security concerns, or, you know, Mia as a woman, you know, was that kind of different to operate? You know, how did you feel about that?
Personally, I never had any major incidences. That varies very much from person to person, site to site, so it's hard to say in general. I also think that I was in a sometimes unique situation being in a predominantly Muslim community. My concerns were also less about security and more about making sure that I was walking the appropriate cultural line and that I wasn't stepping outside of that. Just having my American habits and having to translate those. But it takes a different mindset when you're 24/7 kind of like on the clock. You want to make sure you're aware of your situations. And our safety and security manager was constantly, every time we saw him, like, constant vigilance. And it's not that serious, but you always want to be aware of where you are.
And a question that I have for you, any of you, is when you applied, and I know the Peace Corps program has changed kind of its model over the years in regards to, you know, general openness to just getting assigned to a random country, you know, where you ended up, was that your original intention? Did you struggle with the language acquisition? Do you find that, you know, you're now fluent in your host country's language, or, you know, you applied for one country and ended up across the world? Like, how did that experience go for you?
Well, I originally applied to Rwanda, but as we all know, as Peace Corps volunteers, newsflash, anyone who's applying, got to get through medical clearance. I did not get medically cleared to serve in Rwanda, but I said I'm open to serving anywhere on the continent of Africa, preferably not somewhere I have to learn French. And that's what they gave me. So, and really for me, it was a completely different experience because the two countries I had done service in before while I was in school was Ghana and Rwanda, two completely different countries. Whereas Namibia was kind of like a unique blend of both, not quite as carefree as sort of things went in Ghana, where it's like wearing the traditional attire, just chilling, having fun, meeting lots of people, whereas Rwanda, it's a bit more of a conservative culture. There's a lot of military control and policing that, you know, you have to go through to get to the airport and things like that. But in Namibia, it was like a unique blend of both. for me. With the language, I mean, they speak English for the most part, so a little bit of Afrikaans and other languages for certain conversation starters might help you, but it really feels good like when you go somewhere you don't expect, and it's better off that way. You have even less preconceived notions if you're going somewhere new versus somewhere you've been before and think you're the boss of it and know what to do.
I had a similar experience. I applied to Latin America. I was assigned to Bolivia. I quit my job, and then all of a sudden, a Peace Corps came back and said, "Actually, we're not sending more volunteers to Bolivia." And a couple months later, ended up the program was suspended. I was instead sent to Guatemala, and I loved it. I met my husband there. My daughters were born there, or one of my daughters was born there. So I really feel like I just kind of let destiny take me where it was meant to be.
So I think I have one final question now. If anyone else has any questions, please put them in the chat room right now. But I would say, from your experience, and I know, Mia, it sounds like yours got cut short, but are you still in contact with any of the people that you met in your host country? What are those relationships like now? I mean, I've heard that the Peace Corps, you build really strong relationships with people you meet in country and also with the returned volunteer community. Could you talk a bit about that community that kind of follows you beyond your service?
Yeah, I mean, I can just say my host family will forever be all my extended family. Like for me, they'll always be that way. And they call, and when I was there, they treated me like their kid. And they'll call on my birthday or like send me pictures of what's happening, and it's really cool. And then of course the people you meet, it's a very unique experience and a very intense experience, and so naturally it just bonds you. And I'm sure I'll be friends. And I've known returned Peace Corps volunteers who, like 20 years later, they're still best friends with the people who were in their country. And it's obviously in a post like mine where there's 90 people, that's not everyone in your country, but a good group of 5 to 10 people you'll keep in contact with.
So it looks like we have one more question that jumped into the chat about recruitment. So in addition to working with a recruiter and doing volunteer service as you apply, do you also have any other advice and about how competitive the process is right now for future applicants?
I can speak to that. Yeah, somebody said, is it competitive? Yes, very competitive. So one thing that really helps your candidacy and your application is being open to serving other areas. You don't have to do the serve where needed most. You can have preferences, but just stay on your application. Oh, well, I'm willing to do X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z. And I would also advise everyone's kind of jumping on the public health and youth development posts, and they are even more competitive. Newsflash, Ghana, 250 applicants for 40 spots, just saying. So you kind of have to rethink like, oh yeah, I have a lot of direct experience with this. Well, there's other posts such as education or maybe environment where you can make it work to your skill set. You don't have to pick the one that's the direct link. You want the one that you can, you're the best fit for, and that maybe you have the most chance of getting, but sometimes that's not always the title or description of the post. It's what you can make out of it.
I wanted to talk a little bit about something Mia mentioned, that volunteer experience she had a couple of hours a week while she was applying, going through the process. I think it's important, like I mentioned, 95% of the folks do have a degree, but that experience that sets you aside to be able to say you've had some hands-on opportunities to know, if you apply for an education or if you're nominated for an education position, knowing what it's like to be a tutor or a mentor, or to know I enjoy working with kids is important as you're approaching the Peace Corps application process. Great question.
We'll go ahead and touch on the last question, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap. So our last question is from Laura, and she said, just wanted to know about whether you always live with a host family or whether you have your own place. And I'll add to that real quickly. Did you prefer one over the other if you got to do both?
So I'm happy to talk just for a minute about this. I lived with a host family for my whole 19 months of service, just because in a village as small as mine was, there aren't a lot of live on your own opportunities. But in general, after 6 months of service, I think in most Peace Corps countries, you have an option to move out if you can find an approved living space in the Peace Corps price range. So that varies country to country, what that looks like. And as for whether you prefer it or not, a lot of people will prefer living on their own because maybe they're like me, they're introverted, and it can be a lot to spend a lot of time with your host family. A lot of people prefer to live with their host family, would never have considered moving out just because maybe they're a little bit more extroverted. And living with a host family is a really, really great way to integrate and to develop your language skills, especially if they don't speak much English. So it kind of depends on your personality and what your goals are, I think.
Well, thank you again for joining us for today's event. We want to thank Jessica and all the rest of our Return Peace Corps volunteers here for donating your time and providing some really interesting information for us. We'd like to thank you all for continuing to support the IRC. Jessica, do you have any final closing remarks you'd like to make before we sign out?
I would just like to say thank you all for joining us today. We know that there is a lot of uncertainty ahead, but what we do know is that there will be need for Peace Corps and Peace Corps volunteers in the future moving forward. And if you're interested in that, I invite you to get in touch with me through the link that I put in the chat and see what that could look like for you. Thank you so much again, IRC and RPCVs.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you coming today.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks for having us.